Hey fellow AP Lang teachers, Beth Hall here from Coach Hall Writes. Today's teacher tip video is inspired by the response I received to my Instagram stories this week when I was talking about a couple different low prep activities I do for rhetorical analysis. Because let's face it, there are times when we need something quick and easy to assign, we need something that's easy to grade and get in the grade book, and so I thought of a few different things that I do regularly in my classroom in different ways throughout the year that might be of benefit to others. So if you're not following me over on Instagram or Facebook, I do try to use social media to show you guys different tips and tricks outside of YouTube. So if you're curious about that, definitely check out the links in my description box below and follow me over there. Let's go ahead and look at some of these activities. The first one that people really seem to want to know more about was something that I call, is it defensible? So basically you can use this for all three of the FRQs, though I primarily use it for question 2. And the idea behind this activity is that it helps students learn to identify defensible thesis statements, and we also want them to explain why they are defensible. I realized that once students had to provide a rationale, suddenly they started using the different terminology and really thinking about what makes a thesis statement defensible. So we want them to be able to explain the rhetorical choices present and also connect it to either the purpose, message, or argument. On the teacher side of things, this one is usually incredibly easy to prep and easy to grade. So if you're looking for something that's a quick grade to enter into the grade book, this might be a really good option for you. And there's also an extension activity where you can have students write their own thesis statement after they've looked at some sample ones. When I shared this in my Instagram stories, I had several people ask if I had a template for this that teachers can use to just adapt it to the text in their classroom. And so I did create one for you guys. I've got 2 different versions that I'll link in the description box below. One is going to be on Google Docs and the other on Google Slides. But let me show you what it looks like. Here's a look at the Google Docs version, and I do have multiple templates that you guys can choose from. So here is where you would type in the thesis statements. So I try to choose one thesis statement that's not defensible, and then I try to make one that's maybe defensible but not very strong, and then perhaps a strong one if I'm doing 3. I try to offer a variety. And so all I do is I usually just make them up myself. I type them in the box here on the left, and then in the box on the right, that's where students would write whether or not it's defensible and why. And then here at the bottom, that's where they would then write their own thesis, and the rationale is simply them explaining why their thesis is defensible. This one's the same thing, but instead of 3 boxes, there are 4. So there would be 4 options for a thesis statement. And then I also have one with 5 options, but this one doesn't have the write your own at the bottom because there wasn't enough room. And then in case you want to be able to type in your own prompt, you could put the prompt here. If you want students to be able to refer to the prompt easily, it's there for them, and then they can do the same thing here. And then for those who might prefer a Google Slides version, these are done in landscape, and so it's the same exact concept, except instead of being vertical, now the 2 different parts are side by side. So we have, is it defensible over here, and then write your own thesis on the right. Because it's a template, you'll be able to make your own copy, and you can modify these instructions or choose a different font if you prefer. It's whatever you would like to do. So here's another version of it, and then an even simpler version of it where it takes out the write your own thesis, and then one with the prompt included in case you wanted to add that option for students as well. And then something else that people asked for that I'm not going to link in the description because I don't want it to be readily accessible to students, but if you are a teacher who contacts me, I would be happy to share this with you. This is something that I'm working on. It's just a database of thesis statements for some of the more common prompts that I know teachers use. I'm still working on it, so it'll be done by the time I upload the video, but basically you can see it's a work in progress right now, but I wanted to give you guys a behind the scenes look. The idea of this is that some teachers might not be comfortable coming up with their own thesis statements, or if you're just trying to save time, I can help you with this as well. So I don't have a ton of options, but I have a few for each of some of these major prompts, and all you would do if you wanted to use these is you would just copy it and paste it into the template, and that way you could create your own resource. But like I said, you can just make up your own thesis statements. You can use some that are inspired by the College Board's samples, or you can even perhaps do something with student work, depending on how you want to set that up. That way you can have your students practice identifying defensible thesis statements. So again, this is a really quick and easy activity for students, and it's relatively easy to prep. I think it's probably most useful when students are beginning to understand rhetorical analysis. However, you can bring it out throughout the year as well as a way to quickly remind them of what it means to be defensible. That way they can hopefully get that point as they write their own essays. In those templates, you might have noticed that I had a portion of it where students could write their own thesis statement. You don't have to give them the is it defensible activity to have them do the write your own thesis statement. So this is kind of a bonus activity because it can be done separately, or it can be an extension of the previous activity. I do the write your own thesis statement very often in my classroom as bell work, but I think it could also be incorporated into a lesson. If you like to do exit tickets, I think it would work well for that. And quite frankly, you could also assign this as a very quick and easy homework assignment. So basically what I do when I'm doing this is I make sure that students have already read the passage. Usually, let's say it's a Monday. We might read and discuss a passage on Monday, and then when students come in on Tuesday, I'll direct them to go to Google Classroom because that's what I use. We're mostly paperless right now. And I will put a Google question where in the instructions, it will give the students the prompt that I want them to respond to. Sometimes it's one from the College Board, other times it's one that I've created based on what we read, using the stable wording from the College Board. And basically there's a box where students can type in their answer, and you can even ask them to justify it as well and explain why their thesis is defensible. So in my experience with Google question and the paragraph option, students have plenty of room to write it, but if you use a different system, I'm sure there's a way for you to incorporate this as well. One of the reasons why I like to give students this write your own thesis statement practice is because it adds a tiny bit of pressure by giving them time constraints. So usually I do this while I'm taking attendance. They're working on a thesis statement. So I might tell them they have 7 minutes to do it. As they get more comfortable, I might narrow it down to 5. And then obviously if kids are still working after about 5 minutes, I'll still give them a minute to finish up, but we want to make sure that they're getting used to writing a thesis statement relatively quickly. So in this example, they're not writing an introductory paragraph, though that could be a different assignment if you wanted to include that. They're just writing a defensible thesis statement. And then if I ask them to, they'll tell me why it's defensible. In this video, I'm giving you guys different tips about low prep and easy to grade activities. And so I wanted to tell you how I grade these thesis statement activities in case you're curious. So for something like this, I grade on total points. My grade book is set up as total points. And so I usually have assignments that are either 5, 10, 20, 50, or 100 points. Essays are 100. So everything is kind of done in scale like that. So this is really simple. So usually I would have this be a 5.1 if they're just writing their own thesis statement. If they're doing an explanation, I might change it to a 10-point assignment. It really just depends. But I included a couple options for you here if you wanted to know how you could possibly score it. So let's say you want to do 5 points and they're just writing their own thesis statement. You could have 1 point for a response that's present but not defensible. So you're at least giving them credit for attempting it. If they wrote something that's defensible but it lacks rhetorically accurate verbs, you could give them a 3. And then if they have something that is defensible with rhetorically accurate verbs, you can give them a 5. Now, personally, I would use that approach later on in the year once students are getting better at rhetorically accurate verbs, but some teachers might want to incorporate it a bit sooner. Totally your call because it's your classroom and your grade book. So if you're looking for a different option that might be a little bit more lenient towards students as they're learning this, then you could do maybe 3 points for something that's present but not defensible, and then 5 if it's defensible. So literally, if they write a defensible thesis, they could get the 5 points, kind of like a completion grade. So regardless of how you set it up, that's a quick and easy activity as well. Another activity that I use in my classroom relatively frequently in different ways that I consider low prep are different rhetorical situation graphic organizers. Now, I'm going to be really honest, I don't use these for every text that I do, but sometimes it's nice to be able to have students slow down and write down their answers to some of these questions and really dig into the rhetorical situation. Other times we just talk about it as a class and I might write some notes on the board. It just kind of depends. So there are a couple different ways you could do this. Sometimes I like to do it as a pre-reading activity where students break down the prompt and we also talk about their existing knowledge, maybe of like the speaker, if it's somebody famous, or the historical context. Other times we might do it after they've read a piece. That way they have more information from the passage and then they would often have more to say about the rhetorical situation. Let me show you some examples of some of the graphic organizers that I've used with my students. These are relatively easy to create and they can be a very quick grade as well. So again, I don't do this every time. Oftentimes we might just discuss the rhetorical situation, but if I do want to have students respond to it on paper or on a Google Doc, I'll usually just make a table like this, and there are a couple different formats that I've used. The one on the left is for FDR's Pearl Harbor speech, and these are questions that I've asked students that could be answered before they actually read the passage. So this would be one where I would consider it a pre-reading activity. We want to figure out what students know about the rhetorical situation before they actually read the passage. Basically, there is a box for each of the letters of space. You could also do this with SOAP. And I like to give students those questions there because otherwise I found that if I just put an S and then a big box where they could write whatever they wanted, I would usually not get the information that I expected them to write. I might get the name of the person and maybe like the year they were born, but I maybe wanted them to think about, in this case, the fact that he's president and maybe the fact that he had been in office for a while. I like to give them questions to answer because that way it gives everybody an opportunity to write the notes that I'm looking for, and also it calls students' attention to things that they might not have considered if the box was just one big empty box. So the questions are usually really helpful to students. Now, the one on the right is the same idea, but a little bit different. So I kind of combined acronyms there. It's not exactly SPACE, but it's not exactly SOAP. But these are ones that students could identify based on a pre-reading activity. So this one, they're asked about the speaker, audience, occasion, and argument. This one's for Florence Kelly. And then on the bottom, instead of labeling it context, I just labeled it outside information, but I asked them, what information do they know about the National American Women's Suffrage Association or the women's suffrage movement in general? And there they might tell me about some activists that they know of. They might tell me that they know that women got the right to vote in 1920, so that way I can see what historical background they might know. And then there's another question beneath that as well, asking about child labor. So those are two options. Let me really quickly show you a couple other options as far as format in case you want to try something a little bit different. This one on the left is Carrie Chapman Catt's eulogy for Susan B. Anthony. We have elements of the rhetorical situation at the top with those questions again, and then an anticipation guide at the bottom. So the anticipation guide asks them to give 5 words or phrases that indicate the purpose of a eulogy, and then 5 tone words that would traditionally fit a eulogy. You can do an anticipation guide as well, but you can see that this would be relatively easy to grade. Let's say you have a sub for the day, or you just need to enter a grade for the week. This could be something you could do that would be relatively low prep for you, and it would be well integrated into any rhetorical analysis lesson, regardless of which prompt or passage you're working with. Now, the one on the right here is the same kind of concept. This one's more recent, so I got a little fancier. I added some icons in, but you obviously wouldn't have to do that if you didn't want to. And it's really the same thing. It is in response to Sojourner Truth's speech, and based on the information I wanted my students to know, I only asked them about these 3 components as a pre-reading activity because I really wanted to just have them talk about speaker, audience, and context. This is one that I was doing with my 10th graders recently, and so we're just trying to ease into that rhetorical situation. They don't have all the components just yet. I was hesitant to put this one in the slideshow because I almost don't consider it low prep, but it is another graphic organizer that I wanted to show you in case you thought it might be useful to your students. I want to give credit where credit is due. This was inspired by something I saw Amanda Cardenas do over on her Instagram stories at Mud and Ink Teaching. Basically what I did here is I put the paragraph in the middle. I have a spot where students could write a summary. Now if it looks small, it's because I did this on Google Docs, so it'll expand if it needs to, and they can change the font size. This isn't one that I think would print very well. And then over there on the right, I have a little sentence starter, and I want students to think about the rhetorical choices. And then I have some questions about the rhetorical situation at the bottom, and then they would just bullet point their answers there. But again, Google Docs, because it would expand and they could change their font size. I'm playing with this idea in my classrooms for some upcoming texts that we're doing. If it works out really well, I will let you guys know over on Instagram stories, but for the purposes of this particular one, the Abigail Adams prompt, it seemed to work okay, but it is another way to do a graphic organizer. And I do think this one would be somewhat easy to prep and also somewhat easy to grade. So that's another option for you as well. The third and final activity I have for you guys involves line of reasoning. So you could do this with pretty much any text that you're using for rhetorical analysis. What I have my students do is I have them divide the passage chronologically into sections. I want them to follow the author's line of reasoning. So sometimes it'll be 3 sections, sometimes it'll be 4. I let them decide how many sections that they feel there are. Then what I have them do is I have them write a summary sentence for each section. And sometimes students are a little confused about a summary sentence. I tell them to think of it kind of like a topic sentence of a body paragraph, and sometimes that actually makes more sense to them. Now, I will say this is a really good activity to let students do in either partners or maybe even a small group, like 3 or 4 students, especially the first time they're doing it, as opposed to doing it individually, though I do think it could be done individually if you wanted to. So you could turn this into a graphic organizer, which I've done, just a simple table. So beginning, middle, end of the passage, and they could write their summary sentence in the table. But an extension activity that you could do with this to make it a little bit more interactive and a little bit more fun is you could have the students write those sentences on index cards. And then what I had my students do is they scrambled them up and then they had to give them to another group, and that group had to unscramble them. Now, most groups only had 3 index cards, so it wasn't super hard to unscramble them, but you can see here in the picture, the cards are scrambled. They're from Florence Kelly's passage, and so basically the group that received these cards then had to put them in order, and then they got to see if they were right based on what the other group said. So it's a way to sort of introduce the concept of line of reasoning because we're looking at the structure of the speech and the major movements. But anyway, if you're looking for something that's relatively low prep to introduce line of reasoning, this might be something that you could use. All right, and there you have it. Those were 3 what I feel are quick and easy rhetorical analysis activities that are low prep, easy to grade. Hopefully they're things that you feel you can incorporate into your lessons as well. I would like to invite you to check out the description box below in case you're looking for those templates. And also, I have an AP Lang teacher email list where I send out templates like that relatively frequently. I also do different check-ins and teacher tips and things like that. So if you want to be a part of that email list, then go ahead and click on that link as well. When you do, it will also send you a guide that I put together with 5 tips for teaching rhetorical analysis. And if you are on social media, don't forget to check out Coach Hall Writes on Facebook. I have a Facebook page for teachers, and also on Instagram. I've been trying to be more active on Instagram stories just to show what's going on in my classroom, and I love to receive DMs from you guys over there as well. So until next time, guys, happy teaching!